Humans have populated the world, tons of different resources, different environments, and the one thing that we've held in common out of all of those is that we have always in the past approached whatever resource we're using as our resource base in a way that we've made it the safest, most nutrient dense bioavailable as possible. Period. That's what we do. So when I feed my family or I talk to my students or people that are working with me and we sit down and look at what they're eating, the first thing that I do, well, the first thing I do is get rid of all nut and seed oils. But other than that, that's the first thing. The second thing that, because, animal fats have been in our diet for millions of years. Nut and seed oils, what, 125 years max? I mean,
approximately
something like that. So that's a brand new thing in our evolutionary past. But no matter what it is that's in their diet, the next step that I go through with them is, what are you doing to those foods? Because the end result, if you take this path or this path, are completely different foods. So a loaf of sliced pan and a loaf of long fermented sourdough bread, we call those things bread. But they're two completely different foods. Our bodies don't look at the labels. Our bodies deal with them in a completely different way. And the bread is a great example because that long, slow fermented sourdough bread is essentially what's happening inside the natural anatomy of things like ducks and geese. And I just read an article the other day about angel wing disease in ducks and geese that live in parks. And what happens is when you're feeding them bread, sliced pan, the old people sit on the bench and feed the ducks or whatever, we think it's a wonderful thing. They're actually getting malnourished. And you can see it, something gets deformed in their wings. And so think about, this is what we've done. We take a food that they're designed to eat, put it in our modern way of doing things to process it, make it so that the first part of their digestive tract can't operate on it, right? You cannot ferment already cooked sliced pan. So we take it, do all of our thing to it in a very poor way, put it in, and we take out the germ, we don't do the bacterial fermentation, then put it into the duck, and they're getting malnourished. That's exactly what we're doing to ourselves.
So actually, that reminds me, I believe cattle or cows, if you feed them too much grains, it can give them metabolic problems and metabolic issues. So a similar kind of thing, if we process material, if we change the food, and if we give an animal something it wasn't really designed for, or any or all of those things, we can cause metabolic problems. And guess what we've got in the world today? Enormous epidemic of metabolic disease.
Absolutely. And what we're talking about is happening in everywhere we turn. Every time we turn around, what we think is real food isn't food anymore, and it's been processed the wrong way. So the bread example is one. Another example is maize. So and it's a long example. I'll give you the short version, but maize was first domesticated 15,000 years ago in the Balsas Valley of Mexico. And entire civilizations were built around maize. I mean, and it wasn't like they ate a little bit of maize and a bunch of other stuff. They ate maize and a little bit of other stuff. I mean, huge amounts of maize. And when the early European explorers come to the New World, they liked the maize. They liked it. They tasted good. It was filling. It was easy to grow. It was cheap. And they brought maize back to Europe. And not long after, in its wake as it spread through Europe, was a disease called pellagra, where over the past 300, 400 years, millions of people around the world have gotten sick and hundreds of thousands have died. And to me, this is the poster child example of lack of food processing the proper way. And, so maize is one of the most difficult grains for the human body to fully digest and to get all the nutrition from. And the great example I always give, and I know I'm in Ireland where you guys don't eat as much corn as we do, but we eat lots of corn in America, and a lot of times we eat corn on the cob, and everybody that's eaten corn on the cob has seen corn the next day, right? Which is a good example, right, of it not being that digestible. But even when it's ground up, it doesn't matter. It's very difficult for our body to derive all the nutrition from it. So what happens is, as soon as it hits Europe, we start seeing accounts in the 1700s and then later through time of this disease called pellagra, which first in Spain we see it, then we see it in Italy and then in Eastern Europe. And it starts off as red rashy skin and these scabs that look like leprosy. Your things are falling off and your mouth is bleeding, you go blind and eventually die. And so I think pellagra in Italian is sour skin or something is where the word comes from. And so this is happening for hundreds of years. It shows up in Ireland at the end of the Irish potato famine, where when the U.S. shipped a bunch of cornmeal over as famine relief food. And people had access to it, were eating massive amounts of it. And all of a sudden, this disease pops up in Ireland. And then one of the worst cases was actually in America in the early 20th century. Literally hundreds of thousands of people died in America. Millions got sick in the early 1900s in the American Southeast, where they're eating massive amounts of corn. And they hired an infectious disease doctor by the name of Jeffrey Goldberger to come in to study this and find out what the problem was. And he's studying, and he can't really figure it out. And he looks at some of these accounts of this pellagra, and he sees it has an association with corn. And he comes back, he says, listen, I don't know what this is. I can tell you it's not infectious. I think it's diet related, and I think it has to do with corn. And they were like, first off, nothing this bad is diet related, which is an obvious answer, right? Secondly, don't mess with our corn. Like, corn is king in the South. So he ended up taking groups of people in insane asylums and or mental institutions, I'm sorry, and prisons, and he divided them in half and fed half nothing but corn and the other half regular diets. And these people with the corn were presenting with it. So they still didn't believe him. So he and his wife and his partner would hold these public demonstrations where they'd gather people around, and he'd take some of these people that were, the skin was falling off of them, and they'd draw blood from them and put them in their own veins. He'd swab them with cotton swabs on their mucous membrane, swab themselves, and then they'd actually eat the scabs off of them. Well, he'd put them in pills and swallow it.
Delicious.
Just to show that it wasn't infectious. This was 1917. And finally we believed them, but still didn't know what the association was. But it wasn't until 1938 when there were a couple scientists studying a disease that was popping up in dogs in the Midwest. They had this disease called black tongue that they were eating, who were eating massive amounts of corn as the mainstay of these dogs' diet. They realized that if they fed them liver, then it would go away. And then later they defined it down to niacin. So you know what? It's niacin. So they started fortifying all baked goods with niacin. So anywhere, and I know it's in Ireland as well, most baked goods are fortified with niacin, and this is why. Well, here's the issue. 15,000 years, maize has been the mainstay in the diet, and there's no evidence of pellagra at all in the Americas until it comes back in the 20th century. But all of a sudden, as soon as maize is taken out of the Americas, everybody's getting sick and dying from it. Well, the reason is because in the past, people were doing a process called nixtamalization. They would take the maize. So the people that grew up around, the people that domesticated maize and built their entire culture around it, realized that if they took the corn and simmered it in an alkaline solution, so they would use wood ash, for 20 minutes, then let it sit overnight, and then grind it up, all the nutrients in the corn would be accessible to the human body. All of them. One of those nutrients is niacin. So, this is how weak we are as a species, our digestive tract. Millions of people around the world over the past few hundred years, and hundreds of thousands died because of a nutrient deficiency while eating nothing but the food that actually had it in it. It all went directly through their digestive tract. So, here we are with maize, and it's the past 2 years is the most widely grown grain in the world, and only a small fraction of it is still being processed the right way. Only real traditional tortillas, real traditional tamales are processed the right way. I don't care if you are grinding it or baking it or steaming it or eating, whatever, it doesn't matter. Some of that nutrition is passing right through your body.